Welcome back to the Opera Now podcast. I'm here with the wonderful set designer Chloe Lamford in her outside studio in Deal with her lovely dog Missy as well.
It may or may not get involved.
Thank you so much for having me today.
No worries, welcome to Deal.
I know it's the sun shining. It feels like a seaside getaway. So to begin with, if you could kind of just start at the beginning, really, of how did you enter your career as a set designer? Was your family artistic, or was it something that you pursued independently, or how did it all begin, really?
Well, I grew up in theatre my parents were dancers and choreographers and they met at dance school. So it was sort of inevitable that I ended up in this world somehow. So I grew up in the back of rehearsal rooms and theatres watching things occur. And I thought initially I was going to be a dancer and I trained a lot in dance until my late teens when I sort of realised that actually instead of being told what to do all the time, I wanted to make up my own things. And I'd always been really fascinated by design and miniatures, and I'd had a doll's house for years and made loads of tiny things. So the sum of all my parts seemed to be that this is the only job for me, and I absolutely love it.
And did you start with theatre and
Yes.
in set design?
Yeah, I did an art foundation at Wimbledon School of Art and then studied design there, theatre design, BA, 3 years. Very happy. And then I kind of started my career I really have done like every single kind of thing from tiny all the way now to massive opera houses. But I started off working when I graduated with the youth theatre in my town, and I thought maybe I wanted to be a director, and I helped sort of direct some shows there, and they were like, "Oh, you're a designer. Actually, you've just trained. Maybe you should do." So I started designing their shows and then got like a theatre and education job, and then like got a main house show, so it's sort of yeah, I've kind of done every single kind of tiny venue forever until I started doing bigger and bigger ones, which now have gone very big.
And you've worked across such a cross section of like theatre, opera, circus. How do you find your approach is different to each form, or
Yeah, I work across kind of various fields. I think really my process always stays the same. I think my instincts and impulses have very much come out of quite a choreographic sense of space. I really like to make things that move and evolve throughout a production. And that like love and instinct of it always stays no matter what the field is that I'm working in. I always have like a big magpie phase where I collect lots of imagery and references. I look a lot at the art world, at film and all sorts of different things, and often have like an instinct of a sculptural space in some way as I go. So it mainly it's about time for different worlds. So time changes a lot across different fields. I often have to work enormously fast. And other times you get longer, like opera's so generous in its time scale and you can really think about things and really craft the show like within the design process, which I find really amazing.
and you work so internationally now as well. I wanted to ask you what are the differences between working in America maybe and then working to UK and Europe? Because is that also a time thing? Do you get longer in America with shows or
Um, it varies everywhere. I think opera you make very differently to theatre, for example. Um, and the working practices tend to be very different across Europe to England, from England to America. They all feel different. And you kind of have to really adapt yourself as you visit other places and work in different opera houses or different theatres. I suppose the most notable difference between working in different countries is like a language thing initially, obviously, but also like a language of making. So people will sort of hierarchy might work differently, or like how places kind of function or are put together. So I feel like I'm always like coming into a different country and like working out like what's the best way of getting somewhere. So if we have to in theatre, I can design a beautiful model box. That doesn't mean necessarily that the set build or the paint finishes or sort of how I approach like part of the scenic sort of finishes. I don't know. Like I have to sort of negotiate that process because I'm so reliant on the team that I meet. And so that when I say language, that feels really interesting because the way you talk about scenic paint might be completely different in Europe as it is to the UK, or it might be completely different as it is in America. Um, so it's like translating your ideas and translating through different languages, but also different ways of making, which I always think is like really challenging about
Mm.
how you sort of calibrate that within a new process.
And you worked with Sariaho on Innocence. I think that's what we have. Yeah, not sure if can video because that's what you have behind us on the screen, and it's coming to the Met. What was your experience working with Sariaho, and where did your inspiration come when designing the set for Innocence?
So I created this set with the director Simon Stone. We came on board before there was really a recording of the music. So there'd been lots of conversations with Sariaho about the feel of the piece, and Simon had quite a clear idea that he wanted to make somewhere that could transform before the audience's eyes. Um, and so we had parts of the music recorded, but we didn't really know till we made it, like what actually and how incredible it felt with this amazing offstage chorus that she created, that adds such emotional weight and beauty to this show. So it's like we kind of built it, like knowing that it would go somewhere really incredible, but we didn't know really what it would be like. Um, and I'm incredibly proud of it actually for the way it feels with the music. So the set is a revolving building, and it transforms before our eyes from a restaurant where there's a wedding taking place into a school, and then it kind of empties out as it becomes this place of memory and loss as you go through the show.
And would you say that was a different creative process to what you usually work with, or sort of like how did that differ from your usual, I don't know, everyday?
I think it wasn't that unusual process for me because I've worked so much with new writing and new plays. So I often come on board a project like even when it's in a really early creation. And also working with Simon Stone, he writes during the rehearsal process as well. So I'm used to things being in pieces and kind of conceiving the design alongside something that we don't know necessarily where it's going to go yet. I find it really exciting to be in a process like that. I love working on new plays. I love working with writers, that maybe the design kind of becomes part of the play and part of the process. Like it doesn't. It seems like that could that came with the writing, if you know what I mean. That
Mm.
I always find really stimulating. So it felt quite familiar in that respect because it was a world that we created as it went. So
Mm.
that was really exciting.
You're working on Death of a Salesman
Yeah.
for Broadway. Could you tell me anything a bit about the set for that, or how your creative process for that has been?
Sure. So Death of a Salesman, opening on Broadway in April, is really exciting to work on such a massively iconic
Yeah.
American play. I've never done an Arthur Miller before. And Joe Mantello, who's directing it, really wanted to look at it with fresh eyes. Um, that maybe there's been a way of doing this play for a very long time. And what if we strip it out? And what we ended up with and what we found is like a more liminal, abstract space that's sort of an expression of Willy Loman and an expression of his mental state um, through the show. And it's sort of like an abstracted garage, but a sort of giant, strange one. Um, but yeah, it's been really exciting. And we had to work quite speedily on this one, and we created a lot of versions quite fast as we sort of worked through and dug into the play. Um, and sort of found solutions for how it could sit in a more liminal space. It's been really exciting.
You said you worked quite quickly. How, like, from when you get sort of commissioned or approached about a piece, what are the stages that kind of have to be worked through, and how kind of quickly, on average, do you have to like get through them all? I assume because you work with quite closely with makers, and you work with costume designers as well, who like sort of who is in that collaborative creative process.
Well, the creative process always starts with the director and a conversation with the director. Um, and I really love just like reading through the piece. So sometimes we do that where you just kind of read it and sort of talk with the director and hang out and have ideas. But then in terms of like speed, I guess we build a 3D digital model of the space. My associate, Machiko Weston, is an incredible creator and drafts person and all around design brain. And so she and I would like examine the space and sort of start trying out like a white card model, but we're just doing it digitally. So that phase can be quite speedy because you could sort of dig into things quite quickly and examine sight lines and kind of zoom out and zoom in. And so we would do that. And then I'd make a sketch model with my model maker. Um, then I could look at with the director and we can kind of work with and sort of just see how it feels. It feels always like a three-dimensional model at that phase is really important. Um, and then we'd start building and storyboarding and researching kind of much more texturally. And so we'd have a storyboard phase, but we might do quite a few iterations of that. I really love kind of dramaturging the piece visually. So for me, storyboarding is like a massive, amazing part of my amazing or my favorite part of my process. Um, because I sort of collage things together. And I love doing that. And I definitely think that's like my photographic sort of interests and that side of my art process that feels like sort of my favorite bit. Like I love really kind of like building through what those big stage pictures are and what the kind of story beats that we really want to give the audience. So that might have quite a few phases. But that again can be speedy because we're not always building full models all the time. You know, you can be thinking and collage things together and kind of like find a world and then build it into the model from there.
Yeah. And you said you like storyboarding as one of your favorite parts of the process. What do you think is the most challenging part of the creative process?
I think a challenging part of the process is when you have to talk about the money
Yeah.
and what budgets do and where you have to let go of things or change things or evolve things. Like you might create something and I find like the first time I make an idea, that's the bit I'm really obsessed with. And then after that, it's a series of compromises until you get on stage. And I love it when we get on stage and I love being in the theatre and I love it when we light everything and discover what the show is. But the bit that I find hardest probably is like the financial like wrangling part. And, you know, that gets harder. Things cost a lot more money and budgets don't go as far as they used to. That's a really big part of our process. To sort of work out like what you can pull back on in order to still keep as much of being design as you want.
And then the most rewarding part, would you say, is that sort of like beginning first conception of the idea?
I
Or is
think
it
it's two.
yeah.
I love that storyboarding and imagining into it and like the realm of possibility being endless part of the process. But then I love like tech rehearsals. I love stage and pianos. I love being in the theatre and when you like the show and really discover it. Love that part. So that's my two favorites, big and small.
And if you had to change anything about the opera or theatre world, what would it be?
Change it? Oh, I don't know.
If there's anything you think that could be improved upon or
I feel like I always want to question all of our conventions or our conventional ways of doing things. I'm always up for like, can we discover something new during this process? So I guess my frustration is when it ends up like a museum or we're remaking something just because you do. I always want to wrestle that apart and I get angry with it.
what of you wouldn't want to do that?
Well, I don't know, just as a form, I feel like we have so many tropes and ways of doing things, and I want everyone to be braver and make more exciting things all the time. Challenge the form, I guess.
Interesting. What challenged the directors or the opera houses or theatre companies?
I think all of us should challenge ourselves. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think in theatre, particularly, it's been a time where people haven't felt so brave. I think COVID was really tough on everyone, and you know now things are financially different. So I don't want that to diminish what people feel ambitious about ideas.
And actually, speaking of COVID, did you say you've moved to this the studio shed here where we are? Was that post COVID?
It was. It was sort of 2021.
What brought you to Deal?
So I moved to Deal in 2019. I had reached a point in my career where I'd worked way too hard for a really long time. And I wanted to try and balance my life. So I now live by the sea and I can pretend I'm on holiday part of the time.
Stunning.
And I love that I can design international shows and be in this little seaside town. And I wanted to have children, and that's not always straightforward. So I have two kids now, one who are aged 1 and 4, which is a juggle with an international career. And I really have to be really careful about how much I'm away or do my kids come with me. So being here's been a journey to family and balance, which has been a big
Yeah,
journey.
I was gonna say, how do you balance sort of like your time in the garden, as it were, here, and then time sort of like spent with your children as well?
I don't know. I don't know how to balance it, to be absolutely honest. I don't think it's that straightforward, but I want to be part of their lives as much as I can. I want them to be part of my life as much as they can. So they, while they're at nursery, I design shows in the shed. And then when they come home, I spend time with them, and that's how we do it. The reason that I've moved my studio into this space and that I work remotely with part of my team is so that I can do that and so I can be really present with my children. And then when I go away, I really negotiate, what it means to do that job and how much I'm not going to be around. It makes doing international opera houses difficult. So I'm doing less opera for a while because that involves 6 weeks of big attendance in a foreign city. I don't think that's sustainable right now. So I've been trying to work more in the UK. And then with working in the US, I have quite strict parameters around my schedule and how much I can do. And that's a negotiation and that's a conversation. But I think it's just really important that I'm with my kids loads because they're amazing. So that's what I
And
want to do.
where are you off to next? Is it New York for
Back to New York, but yeah, for Deaf Salesman and Opening Innocence. We did a bit of pre-staging of Innocence a couple of weeks ago. Um, and then I'm going to be a little bit in Amsterdam, and then I'm in the UK the rest of the year.
Thank you very much for having us today, and we'll have our Q&A with Chloe Lamford in the summer issue of Opera.
But thank you so much for coming down.